Chesterton has some wisdom there, when I think it's Everlasting Man, or maybe was one of them, his quip about we've put humility in the wrong place. We we we're trying to be humble, but our false humility causes us to doubt that we can know anything, but we don't doubt ourselves. Like it's an overconfidence in our particular certainty, but it's a doubt on the ability to know things at all. And he said we've got our humility all inverted. We need to be humble in our own particular certainty, but we don't need to doubt the possibility of knowledge itself.
That's good. That's like I have a family friend who is very, very intolerant of anyone that he perceives as being intolerant. So, it's like, I'm the most tolerant person, except for all of my uncles and grandparents and father,
Right.
everybody that I think isn't as tolerant as I am.
Yeah. The
So,
classic defeat of postmodern viewpoint is by what privileged standpoint do you discredit all privileged standpoints? Which, the idea that uh, there's a standpoint at which you can take that lets you see all the standpoints and declare them all invalid. Well, which standpoint is that?
yeah,
Is your
that's
own
good.
standpoint the one that's invalid? Yeah, it was
Well,
but
speaking of all,
yeah,
sorry, what?
no, go ahead.
Well, speaking of all these aesthetic considerations and whatnot, I know that you're well versed in 20th century compositional techniques, and
Dabble.
you dabble, and you've had multiple teachers who that's like their big thing, and I know you've had some big influences, like George Pearl was a big influence, right?
Right.
Um, how would you define yourself, your personal aesthetic with regards to composition? How is it that you write? And I would venture to say it probably changes depending on the medium. I mean, I'm just guessing. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but just from listening to some of your stuff, that you might be a little more what's the word for experimenting with like a solo instrument than maybe you would be with a choir and accompaniment, just from the sheer practicality of being able to write something that people will perform. But I could be wrong. So what is your personal methodology with
Yeah.
composition?
Well, thank you for that question, but it's in progress and always will be. But there is a trajectory to it that I perceive in my work, and it has to do with what we said before. The trajectory is moving toward humanity, toward um, reality outside of myself. What Barry calls an external audit. Um, Here's what I mean by that. Uh, the A younger John composing would compose almost like the isolated artist of the romantic, where all that matters is my internal audit. All that matters is the purity of my art form conceived in my imagination and my mind. And that manifests itself sometimes as music that only I could love. Music that is for no one but myself, and a and accusing, and which typically goes with this, the accusation that the world just doesn't understand, or the world just needs to finally learn. They just and that is a tendency of any artist, lots of artists, I would suppose, and shows itself up in music history in various ways. Um, And it's the temptation of the artist, because we pretend like that's the mark of genius, and that's a romantic story. That's that's a um, that's a character in the history of music that I think anybody on this side of studying the history of music admires and esteems too. And so for a composer and an artist, that can be tricky. You want to be like those geniuses that people just didn't understand, and all that. So
Wasn't this
that's
a Beethoven thing? Just for
sure.
like he
Beethoven.
was sort of the first one that was the ideal of the romantic artist.
I think there may be examples before Beethoven. Beethoven is sort of the quintessential first version of this. And then through the 19th century, it just continues, and well into the 20th century, that character is a character. They'll understand them later, and there's something about that. I mean, because there is such a thing as an internal audit, and this balance between internal and external audit. The internal audit is the one that is the thing that I think that I'm getting this from Wendell Berry, but I might have made this up. It's probably Wendell Berry, but um, the internal audit is that voice inside you that says that insists on truth, insists on authenticity in the best sense of the term, honesty. I'd rather say honesty. Insists on honesty, that it's not a people pleaser. You do this because it's good, not because someone is telling you it's good, because you know it is. And even if the world were to tell you that's not good, you're going to do it anyway because it's good. That's the internal audit, and it's necessary. It has to be balanced with the external audit that says, what are you doing? That says,
Right.
this is good or that. And it can work both ways. An artist can be too self-critical. My wife tells me this is my tendency. I can be too self-critical, which slows me down. You know, I want it to be perfect. I want it to live up to my standards. And sometimes it just needs to be done. And so the external audit might be telling you this is good, and you say, no, it's not good. But you need to listen to the external audit that's telling you, no, that is good. Composers are notoriously bad judges of their own music because they hear it in a different. You hear it too internally, and it's very hard to step outside and hear it through fresh ears. And so, anyway, so uh, I am a story of my composing is the story of trying to rebalance and learn more from the external audit. But also with that goes with the ethics of thinking that my art doesn't exist merely for my own gratification, but that music is something human beings do together. And so my music needs to be for people. So how does that work out? How do you balance artistic integrity with wanting to write music for people? Well, I have not solved this for my own art form. I think, but that balance, music that is to live outside of myself, in service to the Lord, for people, and yet have an artistic integrity that does match the internal audit. How do I bring technique to bear, but not for technique's sake, which might mean suppressing technique? And somewhere in there is the story of my developing art form, and I haven't arrived.
Well, I guess people listening to your music will, be able to discern some sort of, aesthetic influences and that sort of thing. But like orally, what compositional techniques, for example, do you find yourself employing the most? Or obviously, there's probably some intrinsic hierarchy of compositional techniques that you go to first. And so, what might that be?
I don't think that's necessarily true. I'm an omnivore of life. I love experience, and I love technique, and I love knowledge, and so uh, I don't. Uh, you were right before when you said it depends on the medium. That's true. It depends on the medium, but it also depends on the occasion for writing. Um, I teach my students to always seek an occasion for writing. I encourage my students not merely to write music and then beg people to perform it, but that to start with an actual occasion, because one, then you know that the music is valued to somebody from the start. And two, the occasion starts the composition. You know, a blank page is intimidating for a student composer, but a circumstance, my church is, a student composer, maybe their church is having a big Easter service, and what they really need is some anthem that's made for that acoustical environment. and because otherwise you might be you're composing for Notre Dame, but what you have is a small room. You need to write for the small room and see what does this environment and these people and our resources, what kind of music is generated from that. And if a student composer can be particular to the circumstance, then they're going to write an honest music. If on the other hand, if they're just writing in their room, usually on their computer, but for me on the desk or whatever, with no regard to anything out in the real world, uh, then then your piece doesn't live until you sort of do a search for the circumstance that matches that piece. But will you ever find it? I don't know. I think better, especially for a student composer. So all that to say, the technique has to match that. So I'm an omnivore, so I want to marshal as much technical resources as I can through ample study and ability. But then when it comes time to compose, I need to know the particularities of what I'm writing for. I need to know where is it intended to be performed and by what forces and under what occasion. I mean, as far as I can tell, what's going to surround it. And acoustical environment is very important to me. Because music performed in one place is not the same music as performed in another. Uh, that may be something new, because you know how the history of composition is, the history of composers being more particular about what happens in the music. Early Baroque, whatever instruments play that range, you get this line, soprano instrument, alto instrument, whatever, and what do you got? A shawm? Okay, we're going to use a shawm. uh, but then composers started to be particular. Well, it can't be just any instrument. It's got to be this instrument. And then dynamics. They began to be particular over dynamics. And then they began to be particular over modes of expression, and articulation became particular. And then more and more things were particular. Well, for me, the acoustical setting becomes particular. And I think with electronic composers, that's important. They want control over the environment.
Do you write any electronic music?
I have, and it's never been I've never achieved real mastery. And but I'm fascinated by it, and but there's a distinction to be made. Back to aesthetics. I have this theory that if there is a kind of first principles of aesthetics, I think maybe one of those first principles might be something like this. The thing, when it comes to imitation, the thing you are imitating, no, the imitator, how do I state this? The thing you're imitating is always going to be superior to the thing that is imitating it. Because, well, let's take digital organs. Here's your world. So a digital organ, they will continue to get better and better and better. But as long as the aim is to imitate a real organ, they will always be inferior, because the thing that they are imitating is by definition the superior.
Hello, everyone. Would you please consider supporting me on Patreon? I'm really enjoying making this podcast as a means of having interesting conversations with people in the arts and those who are interested in promoting beauty, especially in the liturgical arts. But I'm also doing this as a means of trying to help support my family. So if you would prayerfully consider supporting me on Patreon, it would mean the world to me. The first 20 people in the United States who sign up at any financial level, be that the $5 level or above, will get a free copy of my CD, Bach's Organ Mass, recorded on the Trost organ in Waltershausen. Thank you for your support.